The Legion's Exorcist, a novel of God's Legion, by J.T. Dowdy. Chapter 5. The greatest weapon against the darkness is light. This all righteous sons and daughters of the true faith know in their hearts. The greatest shield against the darkness is our faith, for no foe can ever get past the bulwark of our belief to corrupt the minds of our people so long as we join hands and stand resolute. But the darkness is clever. The darkness of heresy is ever present, ever hungry. It seeks to worm its way into your mind and tempt you bit by bit until you are living in sin, and your family and community lie in ruin. The light and faith of our most noble and true cause may be superior to the darkness, for we can never fail in our glorious crusade against it. However, the darkness has one great advantage we as a correct spiritual people lack. They have numbers on their side. Our foe is legion, and not only the great evil which call itself thus. Our enemy is all who refuse to bow to the light and truth of our most holy Elohim, he who is unmatched in all things. Verily I say unto you, righteous people, true people, good people, do not provoke the darkness by toying with it, lest we be swarmed under by a tide of non-believers. We may be the crusade of light, but even the stars are swallowed by great gulfs of darkness. Excerpt of a sermon by the host Archangel Michael. Norman sat on one of the heavily cushioned couches in Sejet's room, staring at the rosary in his hand, with eyes that saw nothing. While he had not spoken since their arrival back on board Julia, his fingers were constantly counting the beads in time with the ancient mantras of prayer out of habit. His wrist-watch had beeped at him, signifying it was time for the 4 o'clock prayer back on heaven. Normally he would have gone down on both knees to begin praying, but he had not done so since talking with the Legion Master a few days ago. He felt unclean for such a lack of devotion, but as the angel Frigg had reminded him on the planet below, he was excommunicated, and therefore not subject to his people's faith. Sejet had sat with him for a while, but then grew bored and busied herself by dusting her many priceless golden statues and potteries from her homeland. The former Empire Angel had turned the utilitarian grey steel room into a simulacrum of her people's palaces. Colourful rugs and tapestries littered the floors and walls, while a myriad of golden statues with animal heads stared about in random directions. As Sejet was an angel of the Creator Bast, the majority of the statues had feline heads. One massive armchair dominated the corner of her room, where a mortal might have put a bed. Since true angels did not require sleep, there were heaping piles of worn fantasy novels from cultures around the known universes for the angel's reading pleasure. She loved to read about places and people she would never have dreamed of meeting in her homeland of eternal sand-covered worlds. Amun-Ra had preferred such worlds over all others, but Bast was slowly changing what had been normal to ones rich with water. Having tidied her room to the best of her caring, Sejet returned to her towering mountains of silken pillows and resumed her unfinished romance novel titled The Maiden and the Dragon. It was about as trashy and uninspired as cheap romance novels came, but fantasy smut was the angel's current drug of choice. She pulled her knees up to her chest and buried herself into the pillows, then picked up where she left off. About a quarter of an hour later, Norman took a deep, centering breath while closing his fist in a crushing grip around his rosary, and asked, "What would you do?" The angel turned a page and said, "I am not the one to ask. I do not possess the ability to bear children, so the emotions you are feeling do not make any sense to me." "I don't understand." The angel sighed and closed her book on the lustful night Trebaric, as he was about to get lucky with an busty tavern wench to pull up her oversized comfy shirt to show a scarred stomach free of a navel. I was made, not born. The flesh you experienced the other night was made by my will, not cell division in a mortal's womb. Norman shook his head confused. But you are a woman. All women care about children more than men. He paused, then added, At least, this is what I have seen from my experiences in a monastic order. Sejet smiled at the logical fallacy of mortal thought and said, I am a being of spirit incapable of reproduction, and thus, by definition, asexual. I am female because it is easier for me to identify as such, and because I prefer my partner's male. Society's viewpoint of me also defines my being and shapes me into how you see me. It has something to do with quantum mechanics. The master has tried to explain it to me, but to be honest, I really never cared enough to learn about it. Norman nodded as he considered the angel's words. I think that sounds like the idea of belief-altering reality, he replied. So, if society considered you to be a man, then what? If the majority of people who knew me changed their mind to think of me as a man, then it would be extraordinarily difficult to remain as I am now, and you would be considered gay. The humor was delivered so dry and impersonal that the exorcist almost missed it as a joke. Sejet continued, I cannot create life of any kind, priest. So the only understanding I have for the situation is if I had spent a century or millennia building an object which, if used incorrectly, could destroy the world it was housed on. I would be torn between the time I have invested in it and what could be potentially lost. Yet I am eternal and can make more things. So as I said, my perception is still at one in which you should rely on for your question about what to do in your specific situation with your son, as I am incapable of understanding what you are having to deal with. A cold shiver raced down Norman's spine as he thought of the calculating callousness of the angel's words. Part of him was disgusted at her objectiveness, though her explanation of the situation made sense. Do you know what will happen if we do nothing, and no one finds my son? He asked. This is pure speculation on my part, as I do not know how souls work like the Master does. I think that in such a scenario, Ra will eventually override your son's personality and be allowed to take control of the physical vessel. As to how long this will take, I have no idea. But if he does come back, then the end result is the same as if the others had found him, since the location of the library will become public knowledge. Never mind the fact that he is a monster, and would plunge the Empire into civil war as he attempts to wrestle control back from my maker. Norman frowned as he continued counting the beads of his rosary. I do not know much about him, other than he existed. Is he really as bad as you say? Yes, the angel growled, her tone leaving little unsaid. If he is, then how could I allow him to spread his evil to the universe again? Mortal minds always misunderstand that topic, Sejet argued. Good and evil are subjective based on culture. It would be better to say his actions are without regard. So, he is callous, then? The angel shook her head. Callousness still imparts some regard for actions. Think of him like Creator Shaitan, infantile. They act only in their own self-interest, without understanding or caring for the impact of their actions on others. Gotcha, Norman replied. Sejet was beginning to paint him a picture in his mind. If he was going to make an informed decision about what he would have to do regarding his son, then he needed to know all of the consequences of his decisions, as the matter went far beyond just finding and saving his son. Can you tell me more of who Amon-Ra was?" Sejet chuckled while straightening and crossing her legs. "I just did," she said. "But if you are asking what he is capable of, then you will want to look up his actions regarding the Sodom incident. Look up the Sodom system, planet Felmarch. It used to be a legion world some 600 or 700 million years ago or so." The exorcist twitched. The casual way she referenced something measured in geological epochs, as if it happened only yesterday, was disconcerting. "Do you have a net terminal somewhere?" he asked, looking around and not seeing any of the bulky government machines as he was used to. Sejet picked up her book again, while thrusting her chin towards a table which held a half-sphere of blank grey metal about 6 inches across. Norman walked over to it and tapped it with one finger, and was rewarded by a 2D hollow screen and a haptic interface floating underneath. Legion keyboards had less characters and controls than he was used to, but such was the simplicity of basic universal language he could muddle through until he found what he was looking for. For some reason the exorcist looked over his shoulder to the eternal woman flipping pages hard enough to tear them free, as she was completely engrossed in her book. She was even biting her knuckle while giggling. She gave off every appearance of being a mortal woman, until you looked into her creepy, ancient eyes. Norman shook his head as he typed in the word Sejet. The result turned up Sejet, fire in the lexicon of the Empire. He deleted his search and typed in Empire Angel Sejet, while rubbing his eyes. Were they an item now? Lilith hinted as much, but he knew practically nothing about angelic beings, except they were very old. And why would she have chosen him, since he was a mortal? Why would she have chosen him, considering they had only met half a host standard week before, and exchanged all of about 5 words? Norman did not understand women at all, and he understood angelic beings even less, since they were a superior class of being to which mortals could never interact with in his society. Then, those damnable words of "you will find out something here soon which will put things into perspective," came back to throw ice water on his soul. The exorcist grabbed a glass of water to take a drink as a scrolling wall of text came across the hollow screen. It was the last line which caused him to choke as some of the water went down his windpipe. He read the last line a second time, then a third. It said, "The former Empire Angel, made by Creator Bast, known as Sejet, has been in creation for over 6 billion years." "Don't die again," the woman called out, as if her words would help clear the water from his lungs. "Though, given your current condition, I think Lilith could put you back together again, without as much difficulty as the first time." Both of the cryptic sayings made sense to him now, and he felt stupid for not seeing it the first time. However, Norman knew he had not kicked the bucket. He had not even had a near-death experience, if one were to exclude the firefight in the brothel on Emerald Forest. "Will you people start making sense for once?" he said. "Why do you keep insinuating something that never happened? I think I would know if I had been a part of some horrible event. Those are kind of hard to miss." A page turned, and Sejet's matter-of-fact tone left no room for argument. "You drank from the cup on Red Lake the first time. The second time Frigg stopped you after Lilith rewound time and brought your soul back from the library. Remember, Lilith is not just another creator like that fool of a god you claim Elohim to be. She was the first made by him. She is so old that even my jaded understanding of time cannot comprehend what she has seen and experienced. Likewise, she has abilities the beings you and I would consider creators could only dream of. Norman's legs turned to water, and he was forced to sit on the mouth of a large clay vessel as his heart began hammering away in his chest. He clutched at his heart reflexively and felt its wild thumping and the pounding of blood. The woman drove the point home, as blunt as a sledgehammer. I do not form attachments with mayflies as they live short, explosive lives before dying in the physical sense. If I'm going to form a relationship, as you would call it, then I prefer it to be with someone who has the potential to live as long as I do. I have been completely alone before, and I will not tolerate a partner who just vanishes after a few years. You should think on those words if you wish to continue sharing my room and company. Norman turned to stare helplessly at the woman, who frowned as if she could not comprehend his confusion. She closed her book and spoke in the gentlest tone the exorcist had ever heard her speak in. "Look, Norman, you were dead for days. The poison was a nerve agent that killed you like a bug zapper. Were it something as simple as that, Lilith could have just scoured the poison from your body and shoved your soul back where it was supposed to go. There was nanites in there as well, and they began to dissolve your body from the inside out. The damage it caused forced her to do a thing I never believed was possible. The Master even showed up to stop her from rewinding your time, because that went against the very rules he set when making three-dimensional space." The exorcist could only stare at the woman in horror as she looked directly into his eyes and continued. "The Master had plans for you long before you were born, but he was dead set against Lilith doing what she tried. He stopped her several times. She argued with him like I have never seen anyone do before. In the end, he finally relented and let her do it, because she pointed out he had done the same thing for your God after the incident on heaven before you were born. God gave your soul an upgrade before he left us. You, Norman, are now what we in the Legion call a mortal angel. I would not worry about it, though. It's perfectly ordinary for us." As the revelation sank home, Norman began to touch his face and body as if he expected to look different. His blood pressure skyrocketed to where his hearing sounded like the whine of insects, and his vision began to tunnel on him. It took a long time with deep breathing exercises to calm him down to a point where he could ask, "What the hell is a mortal angel?" "Exactly what it sounds like," Sejet replied, as if dropping such a bombshell on the man should not have bothered him. "Do not be afraid, priest. As I said, this is common in the Legion. Most of the mortal legates are what you are now. All it means is that you will no longer age. Your body was born mortal, and so it requires the same functions as it always had. You will need to eat, sleep, go to the bathroom, and so on. But you will live forever. Oh, I almost forgot. If you get shot, stabbed, or maimed, your body will still heal as slowly as it always has, as compared to my vessel. So don't let that happen. It will, however, be healed to peak performance. So if you have arthritics, you won't after a few years." Norman ran his hands over his face, then jumped up to run to the bathroom to puke in the sink as his nerves got the better of him. After hurling what little he had in his stomach up, he looked at his reflection in the mirror, staring back at him. Since he looked at his reflection daily when going about his morning routine, he did not think much of the face staring back at him. But when he really looked this time, he noticed the crow's feet around his eyes were not as pronounced as he remembered. He thought it was just the stress of his circumstances, taking his mind off of his usual aches and pains. But as he focused on his right knee, which always hurt, he noticed the pain was not the sharp, grinding sensation it always was. He rotated his left shoulder and noticed the little clicking sound was more muted. Reaching around to touch his lower back, which always hurt because of his duty belt, it was also not as bad. "Good God!" he breathed out to himself, marveling at what he thought he was seeing, what he thought he was feeling. The smell of his vomit assaulted his nose, and it offended him. So he turned on the water and did his best to clean up the sink before splashing cold water on his face and then using one of the towels hanging up to dry off. As he slowly walked back into the main room, he thought he understood why Sejet had been told not to tell him of this right away. He would not have believed her, or he would have caused a scene and left the group. Norman looked to the chair Sejet was in, half buried by pillows, and said, "For now I will take this on faith you are telling me the truth." He paused to look up at the overhead and let out a long, slow breath through pursed lips. "I just want to know why both Lilith and... Just call him old man like the rest of us do," the angel offered. "Why would Lilith and the old man go through all of this trouble? What can I possibly offer that would be worth a fraction of what they have had to go through?" Sejet thought about the question for a moment before snapping her fingers and getting out of her armchair. "Come with me," she said, moving to the door of her quarters. "I want to show you something that might help you understand the why." She crossed the room to where her boots were by the door and pushed her feet into them before grabbing her whip from a small table, which was more of a tall sitting stool. Norman looked the angel up and down as she stood there in only a flimsy, oversized shirt and boots. Do you want to put some pants on first?" he asked, concerned about her modesty. The angel said nothing as she opened the door and walked out. Once again, Norman was surprised by the sheer numbers of sailors moving throughout the great ship's corridors. He became hopelessly lost as the individual he was pretty sure had dragooned him into being her new partner took ladders and passageways at what appeared to him to be random intervals. They even took a tram ride to what could only have been the opposite end of the ship. At the end of their journey, Sejet paused before a massive vault-like door which looked to be able to survive a direct hit from atomics. "Do not speak and let me do all of the talking," the angel warned. "The gate guards are a singularly humorless bunch. Julia, open the door." Norman swallowed as it became obvious the Legion had miniature host displacement gates on their ships, at least some of their ships. Now he knew why there were so many sailors always coming and going. With only the faintest hint of moving air, stout locks disengaged and the vault door rolled to the left, silently on greased hinges. Inside the room were some of the hardest-looking soldiers Norman had ever seen, and they were all pointing a truly impressive collection of rare and unique weapons at both Sejet and himself. There was even a crew-served singularity cannon for killing creators, though Norman did not know what it was. They had all been playing cards and other games before the door had opened, and they looked as if Norman sneezed. They would blow him to his constituent atoms without a moment's hesitation before dusting what remained with gamma rays, just to make sure he was never coming back to trouble them again. A woman wearing the gorget of a centurion, with eyes as devoid of emotions like a neutron star, stepped in front of the unholy firepower and held out her hand. "Identification," she said, and it was not a request. Slowly, so as to not make any sudden moves, Sejet reached up to remove the silver pendant all legionnaires wore from about her neck and handed it to the centurion, who didn't move her eyes from the pair. The centurion held the pendant to a reader in her other hand, and a floating hollow image of the angel's upper torso appeared with the words, "Name, Sejet. Rank, Angelic Decurion of Legio Zero. Duties, whatever she feels like." The officer glanced only once at the hologram and nodded as if the confirmation was all that held her order to open fire. "Destination?" she asked. "Muster Point, Blythe." The centurion turned to stare at Norman, and he thought the look Sejet had first given him on Red Lake had been calloused. The angel apparently had nothing on the woman looking at him. "Who is he?" "My partner." "Is he cleared?" "The master attached him to our group, personally." The centurion looked back to the Empire Angel before handing her pendant back and said, "We were all wondering if you were going to bring him to poker night on Friday, so we could get a look at him. Follow me." Turning on her heels, the centurion led the pair past the now lowered but not put down weapons of the guards. Several men wearing a massive armor type Norman had never seen before came to follow their commanding centurion, while others took up defensive positions around a miniature displacement gate. The centurion activated a hollow terminal and punched in a series of coordinates, and the blank arch flared to life, and an image of a new world appeared without fanfare. Through the portal and in the far-off distance, hundreds, if not thousands, of Legion warships were ascending and descending, along with great lines of gunships and other flying transport craft. Without waiting for orders, the two armored legionnaires raised their rifles to their shoulders and stepped through the gate. One stood staring directly ahead, cycling his helmet's optical and EM filters, while his partner did the same, while walking in a circle around the wormhole. When the circling soldier came back into view, he gave a thumbs-up gesture to the dour centurion, who held the expression that her coffee was getting cold and someone would be punished because of it. Norman started to walk forward, but Sejet grabbed his shoulder and hissed. "Wait." The centurion stepped through and stood standing in full view for a moment. Then she beckoned for the pair to follow her. Norman braced himself and stepped through the quantum tunnel to another point in some universe somewhere. He felt as if his limbs had turned to lead, and he slapped himself repeatedly with numb hands to quiet the pins and needles feeling of his body. It was only when he bothered to look up and out did he notice the point Sejet was trying to make. Tens of thousands of Legion warships were on the ground, in the air, or high overhead in low orbit. The size of the ships ranged from a half-mile-long corvettes to massive battleships and carriers the size of cities. The cylindrical-style craft Norman knew to be gunships flew in great clouds like flies back and forth across the landscape as they ferried troops to their respective ships. Ground vehicles of every description and purpose clogged the arterial highways doing the same, and Behemoth and Goliath walkers strode past them to their berths on the grounded ships. Billions upon billions of soldiers marched on the ground, since there were not enough transports to ferry them to their waiting ships. Before the Exorcist was an army which would decimate even the golden armada protecting Elohim's capital of heaven in a matter of minutes, if not seconds. "Where are they going?" Norman asked in an awed tone. "Muster Point Blythe is one of the staging systems for the sentients, like Julia go to pick up new crews after suffering losses while on campaign. Besides some of their commanding officers, the troops and sailors you see before you are mostly considered green by Legion standards. This muster point is just one of millions, exactly like it scattered throughout creation. You asked why the old man and Lilith would care. This is why. These are replacement troops, Norman. This is what they try to prevent every day. Your God never cared about you. My Maker doesn't care. But those two fight every day to keep this from happening. They actually do something to save the lives of each and every legionnaire they can. You may not be a legionnaire as of yet, but they are hoping you will join us." Norman thought of the man who had jogged around the track striking up a conversation. The Legion Master called him by his name. He knew the names of each and every one of his soldiers. He cared enough to know. He may not have been able to go to the baby shower the man said was coming, or whatever the Legion called them, but he cared enough to ask to be invited. "Be still," Norman said, murmuring an old quote he found long ago. "And know that I am." Sejet snorted as she turned to push the bug-eyed exorcist back through the gate. She mimicked Frigg's tone and voice and said, "Kid, this is not even 1% of the Legion's military might. You would poop your pants if you knew what kind of hardware they keep for when things become serious. And gods help you if it suddenly all gets pointed at you." Norman didn't see the woman scratch underneath her chin at her burned skin reflexively. The exorcist spent the next several hours combing through databases back in Sejet's room. The angel had retired back to her favorite chair to resume her book. She soon finished it, then pulled out one titled The Princess and the Courtier, and was a quarter of the way through it when Norman shut down the terminal and came over to join her. He looked slightly pale from whatever he had read, but the light of understanding burned from behind his eyes. "Learn anything good?" the angel asked. The exorcist leaned over to read a few lines of Sejet's book, then quickly blushed and turned away from the trashy romance novel. "So," Norman continued lamely, "I thought when people said the Legion was everywhere, they meant evil was everywhere. I had no idea they were being literal." "We are literally everywhere," the angel replied, turning the pages faster as she got to a particularly good part of her story. "Every universe, and every dimension, except the first and second for obvious reasons. We expand the known territories before ceding the majority of the space to the closest creator-run government. We do this to keep universe-ending wars from taking place between the various governments as they jockey for more territory. Over 63 billion combat casualties just last month. That's insane, Sejet. That would be like losing double the entire population of heaven. Every month, good God, and you people have been losing that many for how long?" The staggering enormity of the entity, known to the exorcist as the Legion, was so far out of Norman's comprehension. It was like looking at an object and estimating how many atoms it was comprised of. Such numbers simply had no frame of reference. The angel giggled and squirmed deeper into her pillow fort as she read something nasty. The page she was reading tore free from its binding as she hurried to get to the next. "Funny thing," she said, her eyes flicking back and forth faster than any mortal could read. "Our casualties are quite low when you consider what we do. Even Ra balked about his losses in the Sodom system, and that was considered a minor skirmish by Legion standards. Speaking of, did you look it up like I told you to?" "Yes," Norman replied with a nod of his head. "Amun-Ra brought 3 billion slaves to attack the fortress world of Felmarch. After he was thrown back into the void twice, he glassed the planet with so many atomics, he blew the atmosphere off." "And how exactly did that temper tantrum work out for him in the end?" The exorcist shuddered as he folded his arms across his chest and recalled what he had read earlier. The surviving legionnaires evacuated. He paused to mutter a brief prayer. Then the Legion Master crushed the red giant star of Sodom down into a singularity. Hold on. If the gravity remains the same, how did the scattered Empire forces get killed if they were in ships in the void? I mean, unless you fall into the singularity, get burned by the accretion disk or the gamma ray bursts from the poles, you should be fine, right? The angel turned her head to stare at the exorcist in horror. She shook her head and said, "It seems you failed to remember what happens to a supermassive star as its collapsing mass rebounds after making a singularity. There is this little thing called a hypernova." Almost absently, she reached up to scratch her chest. Norman followed the motion with his eyes, only to pause. When they had first made love, he had asked about the hideous scars which made her flesh look like running wax. The angel had brushed aside the question, and Norman did have other things on his mind rather than pushing the issue. "Merciful Father, you were there when the star blew." "Obviously," the angel growled as she rubbed her back on the mound of silken pillows, because the itching was growing worse as the conversation progressed. "How did you survive that?" Sejet fell silent as she mentally relived what she considered the worst day of her hellishly long life. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded far away and haunted. "I can only guess as to who saved me and why, since the only creators I knew were in system were Ra and the old man. All I remember was a blasting fire, hot enough to vaporize everything around and boil my flesh away. I couldn't even scream, it was so terrible and so quick. When Ra found out I had survived." The angel broke off and hugged her knees to her chest. "I do not wish to talk about it." The pain Norman saw in the angel's eyes was too terrible to look at for more than a few seconds. Though he was only 271, Host Standard years old, he felt he should do something to comfort her. He moved to where he could sit behind her, to wrap his arms around the crying angel. She flinched from his touch, then slowly allowed herself to be comforted. Hours later, Sejet spoke again. "To this day, I do not know why he spared my life, given the terrible things I did in the service of my gods. Looking back on it, a person does have to wonder if it was to prepare me for this task." Those words startled Norman out of a drowsy sleep. "Task?" he slurred. Sejet shrugged as she turned sideways to kick her legs over the side of the chair, an act the exorcist was eternally grateful for, as feeling began traveling to his toes with fiery pins and needles. The angel was more dense with iron-hard muscle than she appeared, and cuddled as well as a brick. I was a much different person before Ra visited horrors on me. I used to be utterly devoted to my gods and believed every word they said. Now I look at everything objectively, by weighing the possible outcomes of my actions." "Sorry, but I'm not really following you." She seemed to ignore the question, and continued. "When I awoke, I found myself being tended to by someone I later came to realize was a Legion merchant living in the city of Urg, on the planet Hatchept. He begged me to not return to Gomorrah and report back to Ra. He begged on his knees, priest. I laughed at him and told him I knew where my duties lay. Called him a coward. Killed him for being a coward." She broke off as tears rolled down her olive-colored cheeks. Her voice came out hoarse. "Ra blamed me for our failure at Sodom. He visited horrors upon me, the likes of which are beyond your comprehension." "But," Norman said, confused, "the records show Ra was killed a little over 1,000 years ago. Surely you were not tortured for such a—" He broke off, not needing to finish the question. The angel laughed, a hollow sound, as she wiped her eyes. "I have no way of knowing how long I was kept locked up, since most of what I do remember was screaming. I did everything to make the pain stop, priest. Prayed to all of the Empire gods, and even my maker Bast did not see fit to save me. I prayed to Odin, your Elohim, An, Izanagi, everyone I could think of. They all ignored me, and I thought I would either die or go mad. Then I remembered someone had saved me when Sodom exploded, and it was definitely not that monster Amun-Ra. Desperate people do desperate things, and I prayed to the being my culture told me was nothing but a deceiver and a monster. To my surprise, he saved me from my living nightmare, and I have been with the Legion ever since." Norman nodded his head as he absorbed the story. And you joined Lilith's band about 500 years ago. What did you do before that? Decurion in Legio Zero. Served as a liaison between Bast and the Old Man during the beginning of the ongoing First Creation War. Still do in some cases. Now, I am here. What is Legio Zero? Norman asked. Sejet laughed at him. You really know nothing of the group you find yourself in, do you? Zero are the redundant bodyguards of the Legion Master. Century Zero are the 100 people who directly follow the Master around on his ship. The full Legio is made up of the best soldiers the entire Legion has to offer. Each of us are masters at our individual craft when it comes to what we have to offer. The image of her holographic badge flashed in the Exorcist's mind. Your ID said you were a Decurion. He knew little of their rank structure, other than a Decurion was their lowest field officer. Is that like our guardsmen lieutenants? A Decurion commands 10 men, generally 8 legionnaires and 2 specialists, the soldiers you see wearing the larger armor. She waved her hand at the man's obvious next question. The Colossi support chassis are the more bulky armor I am talking about. They carry what you would understand as heavy, crew-served weapons, along with grenade and missile launchers. Legio Zero does not exist on paper. It comes and goes when the need arises. Its core is the century which follows the Legion Master around as his bodyguard, as I said. The rest of the Legio does exist, but we are scattered around as needed, until we are recalled to make a larger fighting force. Norman knew a legion was anywhere between 5,000 and several tens of thousands of men, according to what he had been told in Host basic training, though he did not understand how such a military existed with such a basic rank structure. Why would you break the Legio up? Sejet shrugged and spoke, not in boast, but in fact. We are the best at what we do. Using us on every problem would be like using atomics to open a peanut. The only mortals in Zero are the 5 that are symbolically with the Master. Think about it, priest. Would you use a whole army of beings of spirit to fight mortals on the front line? Or would you use that army to decapitate and break nations when you needed to? Gotcha, the second option, obviously. The exorcist adjusted himself, in a vain attempt to get feeling back in his legs. The angel's muscle mass was growing heavy again. Do you know anything about the rest of this group? Well, the woman mused. I really do not know much about the happy-go-lucky Frigg, other than he drinks more than a regiment, and loves playing games where he can win money. Eloleth says she had some kind of a religious crisis of faith while assisting one of your people's colonies, which came under attack by demons alongside our angels, Jophiel and Raguel. Excuse me, but those are host angels. Sejet snorted. They are legion, and are on loan from the Master at Elohim's request. Think back, priest. How did the Master interact with them during that little incident with the neutron bomb on heaven before you were born? Norman did not even have to think about it. All host citizens had seen the broadcast of Elohim returning to his government live, or at the very least, watched the recording of the incident when someone had detonated a bomb that killed hundreds of millions. During the incident, the legionnaires accompanying the Legion Master and Elohim had pointed their weapons at every host angel and archangel present, when the archangel Michael had openly challenged his god upon his return, except for 2. He did not understand why, at the time, but the pieces were falling into place now. Continue, please. Lilith was the first maid. I cannot tell you any more than that, because I do not know, and she will not talk about her past. I can say that her abilities are closer to the Master than any other creator we have in the Legion. And what about Baphomet? The woman folded her arms across her chest and tugged at her lower lip with the fingers of her right hand. He is very interesting, she said finally. His attitude and demeanor are that of a younger angel not so jaded by the passage of time, yet Lilith talks to him as an equal rather than a subordinate. He behaves as a child does, and yet is still hyper-focused and serious when he needs to be. I have no proof, but I think he is far older than he appears to be. He will give suggestions which border on orders, and most of the time Lilith will go along with him. I have asked Julia for more information on him, and she would not tell me. Mind you, I was hand-picked by the Master to be a part of Zero, which means I have unfettered access to almost anything I want to know. That should tell you something about him. The pair sat in silence for a long while, just enjoying each other's company. Finally, Sejet asked the question Norman had feared and done his very best to avoid thinking about. What will you do about your son? Before you argue, you should know this. The old man is never wrong. Oh sure, he may confuse the truth and lie out of his ass when it suits him to continue his grand charade. But he is never wrong about serious things. Part or the whole of the soul living in your son is the monster Amun-Ra. If the other side has its way, he will be joined with Shaitan, or consumed so that others can find the library and devour its contents. Never mind, every being of spirit currently arrayed against the old man will be coming after your son to gain the location of the library, since they have to know by now. She paused to shake her head. What is it? I'll tell you after you answer the question of what will you do. Norman grimaced as he did not yet know enough on what he could do. Plus, he wanted to save his son if he could. I don't know what to do, he said. Sejet held her hand up in an obscure empire gesture. Seems an easy enough one to me. No, Norman replied. What if I am wrong? This is my son we're talking about here. There must be some other way. The angel suddenly became cold and serious, and her tone left no room for argument. You missed the point. If Ahura Mazda and her faction gain control of or consume the library of souls, then the old man may be forced to reset a great many things, or outright destroy this universe, or... She paused to sink her next word home. Creation. Those monsters cannot be allowed to possess that kind of power, alongside the will to actually use it. Remember this, the Master has all of the power your mind can think of, and more, but he only uses what is necessary to get the job done. Even then, it can be too much. Consider it this way. Amun-Ra is like a child who throws tantrums for not getting his way, and the Library of Souls would be like giving said child the powers of God, capital G, with a big shiny red button that said it would give him whatever he desired. Norman hung his head and sobbed, as he knew what he should do. But he did not know if he had the strength to do such a terrible thing. Besides, if he killed his son, as the angel was hinting he should do, the soul of Amun-Ra would go back to the library, and the whole process would start over again. To my thought earlier, Sejet said, I have a feeling this is why the soul of Amun-Ra was not just obliterated or absorbed. The old man wants the others to fall on themselves, trying to get knowledge they would have to have in order to have a hope and prayer of beating him. Hence why Lilith is mysteriously here when she should be out doing her job as the head of the Legion Church. I'm still not following you. Holy crap, priest. We have the first person made by God, who has most of the knowledge and abilities of God. I earned my spot at the table by being very good at killing angels. You have a being which someone such as I cannot get information on. Elilith led armies, and Frigg led the army which blunted, stalled, and then threw Michael out of Aesir space after he invaded with the Terrans. How are you not getting this? Do you think we have this many powerful and professional butchers in this group because we're making a grocery run? Baphomet has his entire legio on standby for when we need the axe to fall on something. Use the organic matter in your head. Norman understood what he was being told the first time. He just did not want to admit it. The levels of unholy firepower present was for something more serious. So, he replied, my son is being used as bait. Bait whoever the enemy is cannot just ignore and let slip past. Sejet nodded. Do not become angry. From what limited knowledge I have of the situation, most mortal souls are assigned to new vessels at random. Most stay within the culture they were previously assigned, since it is an easier transition. There are rumors the old man can choose what soul should go where, and of course he has that power. But it may very well be your son was chosen at random to house Amun-Ra when he was cast out. Norman thought about it for all of 5 seconds before asking, Do you really believe that coincidence? Sejet closed her eyes to sigh. No. I believe God chose you to be the arbiter of this incident. Perhaps possibly even the fate of this creation, but that is a bit nihilistic. Whoa, hold on a minute, Norman argued, sitting as upright as he could. He could feel the blood draining from his face as it went pale, while his heart began to hammer in his chest. What did you just say? I think you are God's arbiter in this matter. Your role with us makes little sense otherwise since you were up until recently. Just another mayfly. No, Norman argued. What was that part about the fate of creation? Do you think someone such as I would be an effective judge on such matters, priest? The answer is no. Regardless of what happens out there in the infinitum of creation, I will continue on as I am, unless killed by an equal or greater. I will always choose to fight and continue my own existence, because that is all I have ever known. I lack the perspective to make any judgment on if this part of the plan is working as intended, or if it is even worth saving. Things are falling apart so regularly, I have this little feeling that he might be considering wiping the slate clean and starting over. That is just an opinion, mind. One in which we might have talked about, at some length a long time ago. He never said anything to me about you, though. Norman had his face buried in his hands. Oh God, he moaned. Why me? I am not qualified for anything like that. Nor am I qualified to speculate on his intentions. Yet, were I to speculate, and this is just a guess based on knowing him, I would say it is because he lacks perspective. Of course, he would want to fight until the end, because he labored for so long, making and adjusting this creation. I believe he does not know if this creation is worth saving or not. Explain. Sejet was quiet for a long moment, as if debating what to say. Take a look at the creator nations in this verse. The host is so internally broken from the machinations of Michael and the rest of the archangels, it barely functions. Need I remind you, if the host falls, it will mean the loss of near-instant transportation of goods for not only this universe, but countless others as well. The resulting collapse of interconnected economies will throw everything into turmoil. Vishnu's Brahmanavata is collapsing, as it appears he has joined the other side, with only Creator Kundi willing to help us publicly. Odin's Aesir is still rebuilding itself, after Michael drove the spear thrust into his empire thanks to the newly acquired hyper-religious Terrans. The empire is still busy putting down rebellions from the lesser creators who are trying to grab power after Amun-Ra's death, about the only creator-run nation which is not going through any upheaval at this moment is An and Ki's protectorate. So that is what? One versus how many in this universe? How many other universes with creator-run governments are out there? Do you think they are all smelling like roses at this very moment? What of the Legion? Yes, us, Sejet mused. At the moment we are fine, but I have it on good authority. Creator and Ahura Mazda are working very hard to set something into motion which will cause numerous internal civil wars. Even outside of this verse there are problems. Gaia's enclave was split in two when she rejoined the Legion, as Zeus and Ares were not having any of that. Izanagi, while having a vastly powerful military, is lazy and will not leave his palace to go handle matters personally. I am sure you do not know who half of these nations I am talking about are, but let's just say most everyone is currently having problems. What is most concerning is what is happening to the Host Ascendency. Tell me, how active are the demons which lurk in the great void? Being an exorcist, Norman knew what she was driving at. Raids on planets and shipping are generally in the single-digit percentages, he said. I see your point. If the gate network fails or is rendered useless, I imagine they would come out of the woodwork and start attacking the long supply chains which nations would be forced to use. This would draw away military vessels for protection, which would leave many worlds open for invasion from other avenues. Sejet nodded, seemingly pleased. I do not know if Ahura planned to have the majority of her children going feral in the universe, which acts as the central hub for the host gate network, but it sure is inconvenient for us right now. Who exactly is she? Sejet shrugged. She is rumored to have been a companion of the Master for a very long time. I do not think she is anywhere near the age of someone like Lilith, but she may very well be as old as what my kind call the Elder Creators. Many times, many of what you would think of as universes old. She is insane, exceedingly dangerous, and has multiple personalities. Rumors say she used to be like everyone's favorite aunt, but whatever happened to her, happened. Now she is no better than Ra. The angel moved to stretch her muscles. I do know the Master has agents out trying to round up the demon lords and princes who are capable of intelligent thought. He is trying to bring them back into the Legion to take away pieces from the chessboard. When the time comes, they are called by their Maker to descend openly on the universes. That is a grim thought. Indeed, our enemy's plan is masterful and simple. Force us to fight civil wars on universal scales. Then when their armies come, the demons will hit us from millions of blind spots to draw off huge portions of our defenders. I would applaud the efficiency of their plans if I were not caught in the middle. The two sat in silence for a while, with Sejet continuing a book and Norman deep in thought. Finally, Norman asked a question which had been building in his mind as the angel had been explaining things. Wouldn't God know of their plans? He made it very clear to me that he really is omniscient. Of course he does. Then why does any of this have to happen? Because of free will, Sejet replied. He values that idea more than you will ever understand, more than I can understand. He tells us what is coming and what we should do about it. But he does not force people to act, and instead lets them either heed his warnings or— She trailed off. Or die, if that is the individual's wish. To me, his actions in this regard are brutal, and I come from the empire where slaves are a mere commodity, to be traded and used accordingly. I do not know why he does not take his creation to heal and end this game. There came a faint, amused voice in Norman's mind, which Sejet did not seem to hear. Because if I did Norman, the end result would be no better than if I floated in the dark void I showed you earlier all alone. Norman was surprised to find he understood the meaning of those words. In the void he had seen, there was nothing. However, in universes ordered exactly to the Maker's will, scripted down to the very last detail, everything would be just as cold and empty as the void, and so there would be no point to creation at all.